Tonight, we come to you with an exclusive interview, an interview that once again exposes the nexus between the Chinese regime and the World Health Organization, that raises questions about China's influence on social media giants, that shows how China has institutionalized cover-ups and has a global network to silence critics. The newsmaker tonight is Dr. Li Mengyan. She's a Chinese virologist and a researcher who was at the University of Hong Kong until recently. She had to leave China because her research put her life in threat. She says the Wuhan virus was made in a laboratory and that China also covered up its COVID numbers. She's now in the US and she spoke to us from there. Her research paper has been rejected by the scientific community overwhelmingly. We asked her about it and why she's being linked to a political outfit. Why does a researcher need political backing? This is Dr. Li Mengyan's most comprehensive interview. Also on the show, first XINJIANG, now Tibet. China is building another set of mass jails, military-style labor camps to control the region it has occupied for decades, Tibet. In Sri Lanka, the parliament is taking up a new legislation that gives the president sweeping powers. Even the country's top court cannot question him. Nepal has halted the distribution of a new anti-India textbook in schools. We'll tell you what the row is all about. And more than 90 whales feared dead off the coast of Australia. Why do whales die in such large groups? Biologists say it's because of tight family bonds. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Taiwan has asked China to back off after multiple PLA jets crossed into Taiwan's airspace amid an uptick in Chinese military activity in the region. Taiwan has warned China of counterattacks, saying it reserves the right to self-defense. The US has slapped new sanctions on Iran.
Today I will take the first action under this new executive order by sanctioning the Iranian Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces Logistics.
Now that the UN penalties which were eased under the 2015 nuclear deal will be restored, the US is also sanctioning Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro for working with Iran and flouting the UN arms embargo. Donald Trump has demanded enforcement by American allies. Russia has successfully tested its air defense systems during joint military drills in the south of Russia. The drills will continue until September 26th. Belarus, Armenia, China, Pakistan and Myanmar are taking part in the exercises. Indonesia, Iran, Kazakhstan and Sri Lanka have been invited to observe the drills. Tropical storm Beta made landfall today in Texas, bringing heavy rain and flash floods to Houston. Forecasters ran out of traditional storm names on Friday, forcing the use of the Greek alphabet for only the second time since the 1950s. Several worker unions, students and activists took to the streets of Bogota to protest against the social and economic policies of President Ivan Duque. As well as police brutality, violent clashes erupted near the central Bolivar Plaza. The death of a Colombian lawyer, Javier Ordonez, in police custody this month has sparked widespread protests in the country. At least 13 people have been killed in the violent clashes. Nearly 66 civilians and over 200 police officers have been wounded till now. Asian stocks dipped on Tuesday after US equities slid on concerns over COVID-19 curbs. Indian shares fell on Tuesday amid fears that rising coronavirus cases could stall an economic recovery, while fears of fresh lockdowns in some European countries threatened to further hit global supply chains and weighed on domestic sentiment. The broader NSE Nifty 50 index fell 0.70% and the S&P BSE Sensex was down 0.8%. Tropical storm Beta made landfall today in Texas, bringing heavy rain and flash floods to Houston. Forecasters ran out of traditional storm names on Friday, forcing the use of the Greek alphabet for only the second time since the 1950s. Ice in the Arctic Ocean has melted to its second lowest level on record this summer, triggered by global warming. The extent of the ice-covered ocean at the North Pole and extending further south to Alaska, Canada, Greenland and Russia reached its summertime low of 3.7 million square kilometers last week before starting to grow again. Manchester City began their campaign to regain the Premier League title with a 3-1 win at Wolverhampton Wanderers. City were missing a host of players due to injury or COVID-19, but went ahead through a Kevin De Bruyne penalty in the 20th minute. Teenager Phil Foden doubled the lead in the 32nd minute as City put Wolves to the sword in the first half. But they ran out of steam in the second half. A shadow of doping has surrounded cycling's most prestigious race, with French authorities revealing that the rooms of the Arkea Samsic team were searched after stage 17 in Marseille. Public health authorities searched hotel rooms belonging to Arkea Samsic, who are led by Nairo Quintana, who finished 17th and has had podium finishes in the past. Prosecutors confirmed that an investigation has been opened after the discovery of many health products, including drugs. A doctor and a physiotherapist have been arrested, but Arkea Samsic maintain that those questioned were part of the players' entourages and not directly linked to the team. The history of the tour is littered with massive doping scandals, and none more so than Lance Armstrong, who was stripped of his 7 titles after admitting to taking performance-enhancing drugs.
Tonight I want to start with an exclusive interview with the world's biggest newsmaker right now, a Chinese virologist who says the Wuhan virus was made in a Chinese lab. Dr. Li Mengyan has fled her country, China. I spoke to her this evening and she has made claims which should worry Chinese President Xi Jinping, WHO chief Dr. Tedros, social media giants like Twitter and Facebook, and some major universities in the West. She says China tried to make her disappear when she was in Hong Kong, and now that she's in the US, China is trying to silence her on social media and discredit her research as unscientific. Here's an excerpt from our exclusive conversation. Dr. Yan, welcome to WION.
Good morning, Palki. Thanks for having me.
You've created quite a stir with your claims. Why do you say that the Wuhan virus was made in a laboratory?
Okay, as I mentioned in my first report, and also I will stress the other thing from the next coming report, that the evidence left in the virus genome from the SARS-CoV-2 virus clearly show that this virus is not from nature, and it is based on the Chinese military discover and own the very special Zhoushan bat coronavirus ZC45 and ZXC21 after the lab modification and become this harmful, highly contagious and lethal virus. So there are all the scientific evidence I presented in my 2 reports. Besides, I have other intelligence and based on my knowledge. So altogether, people can understand later that it definitely come from the lab.
You've made some very startling claims, and you've said that they knew about human-to-human transmission. They knew that the virus had a high mutation rate. How much did the top levels of the Chinese government know at the time of the outbreak? Do you believe that President Xi also knew what was going on?
This is a Communist Party-ruled government. Trust me, these things all come to the top, and not only among the top people. For this kind of human-to-human transmission, at that time, although in early January, there were some experts from the headquarters in the China CDC coded to the journalists and also allow it to be spreaded. But the other experts in this field, including the doctors and even just the local doctors, they knew this is a lie because there are already family clusters happened in Wuhan.
So you were told that you should not cross the red line. You've said that a WHO-affiliated lab was aware of the high mutation rate and human-to-human transmission, and they too hid the information. Was the WHO also equally a part of this cover-up, only this lab, or to the highest levels?
My previous lab was the core team which fights with the virus and did a lot of great study. So these are the top bench of the coronavirus virologists. They are behind the WHO, provide the technique, consulting the information, and also give them support. So there is no doubt that they already know the information. I respond to them, and they have established their own directly that page to the Chinese CDC, as I know, and also they respond to WHO. So WHO definitely know it because they rely on that to do the surveillance and to give the consultant.
What do you think this report does to Xi Jinping's global image? How do you think the Chinese government would have responded when you first came out with your accusations?
I don't know how exactly she's thinking now, but what I know is Chinese Communist Party tried to make me silence from even end of April when they know I'm the one who delivers a message out through the Moody's broadcast from mid-January and kept doing that. So they tried to make me disappear, and after I escaped within hours, the whole government knew these things, and the Hong Kong policeman, the Ministry of Security State in Beijing, and also my hometown Qingdao's policeman, they work together.
So you know how the Chinese Communist state operates and how they would react. But were you surprised when Twitter also suspended your account for fake news?
I'm not that surprised, although they even shut down my anonymous that another account which shares the same phone with my official account. That means totally they trick my IP and try to make me shut up. And also Facebook did it. But I already know that Chinese Communist Party and their friends, they are very powerful. They are very influenced. And that's not the first thing Twitter or Facebook did. For example, I complained about the fake account under my profile for months. No response from them. And also, they just shut down me, but they allow the other people like the Chinese minister like Zhao Lijie or Hua Chunying telling the virus come from salmon, come from outer space, come from US. So I'm not that surprised.
So you're saying that the Chinese regime is influencing social media giants to silence critics?
I think that is something now more and more well known by the public now.
I'm saying that there's a lot that has been written about China's funding and influence on the press, on think tanks, on institutes. You're saying they're influencing social media giants. Do you believe the Chinese state can also influence studies and research on the Wuhan virus?
Of course. I've been there for many years. I studied, get my MD, PhD degree from the two top medical universities in China. I knew many people have my vast network in hospitals and in institutes, including the army ones, also the authorities in China. And also I work in Hong Kong for many years, now 8 years almost, and in the WHO lab for over 5 years. So all my experience and my knowledge can tell you Chinese Communist Party's money and power influence the whole world far more beyond your imagination. And they are using a very, hidden way. And even some people, they get influenced, but they don't understand. Or finally, when they realize they have conflict of interest, but they cannot tell it out, or they are scared of these things.
Dr. Li Mengyan, thanks very much for joining us here on WION, and stay safe.
Thank you, Palki.
This was just a part of the interview. We also asked her about why the scientific community the world over has rejected her report, why it was a preprint, why it was not peer-reviewed, and why does she need the backing of a political outfit for a research paper. She's answered all those questions. You can watch the full interview. Dr. Yang's charges are very serious, and we do not expect Xi Jinping or the Chinese state to clarify, but we urge the WHO to come clean on its involvement in the cover-up. The chief of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, publicly promised us an interview many months ago. He's yet to give us a date for it. The sooner the WHO chief answers these questions, the better his chances of restoring any credibility to the institution he represents. China has moved to another hunting ground, Tibet. China is trying to erase Tibet as we know it. It is trying to turn Tibetans into slaves. Xi Jinping has done this in Xinjiang. He put an entire province into mass jails. And now he's doing the same in Tibet. China has built military-styled indoctrination camps. Thousands of Tibetans are being forced into these camps and they are being shipped off to different parts of China from here. Tibetans are being pushed into forced labor across the country. Our cover story tonight is about China's mass jails in Tibet. Let's start with some pictures. These are Tibetans. They are dressed in military fatigues. China state media has published these pictures. One of them shows men practicing painting. Another photo shows Tibetan women. They are being trained to become restaurant waitresses. China would have you believe that these Tibetans are undergoing vocational training, but the world has heard this before, and the world has seen this before. Remember how Muslims are being trained in Xinjiang. They are being crushed. They're being rewired to toe the Communist Party line. It has been called a genocide. Now, the same is happening in Tibet. 2 reports have come out that conclusively prove that China is indoctrinating Tibetans. The first one talks about how China is pushing Tibetans into military-style training camps. Camps like the one I just showed you. Tibetans are being turned into factory workers. The orders have come from Beijing and the brief is very clear. Train Tibetans, then send them to different parts of China. Local officials have been given targets for this. They must train and ship out a certain number of Tibetan workers in a given period of time. And it's all happening against their will. This is what a modern slave operation looks like. It began last year. Now the operation has hit top gear. In the first 7 months of 2020, listen to this figure, in the first 7 months of this year, more than 500,000 Tibetans have been trained. 500,000. Thousands have been shipped across China. 50,000 have been transferred into jobs within Tibet. What kind of jobs are these? Low-paid work in industries like textile manufacturing, construction and agriculture. Let me give you some specifics. Tibetans of all ages are the targets. The entire region is covered under this Chinese operation. China says it is, quote-unquote, reforming the backward thinking of the Tibetans. It is training them, and I quote again, in work, discipline, law. They're also teaching them the Chinese language. What it means is basically this. China is building a loyal force of workers, one that follows the rule book of the Communist Party and presents no challenge whatsoever to the Chinese establishment. Who is training these Tibetans? Drill sergeants from the People's Armed Police. This is a Chinese paramilitary organization. They are responsible for internal security, riot control, anti-terrorism, disaster response and law enforcement. Surely the Chinese paramilitary is not there to teach Tibetans life skills. This is about crushing the opposition against the Chinese state, and the opposition is real. Xi Jinping is worried about the Tibetan struggle for independence. Last month he talked about fighting what he calls splitism in Tibet. The Communist Party sees the opposition in Tibet as a threat. They call it separatism, a threat to national security. Beijing has ruthlessly gone after free Tibet campaigners. When the Tibet protests erupted in the year 2008, there were thousands of arbitrary arrests. More than 100 trials were pushed through the Chinese judicial system. Hundreds of Tibetan detainees and prisoners remain unaccounted for. China followed this up with a long-term plan to force the integration of Tibet into China. In 2011, a new party secretary arrived in Tibet. His name is Chen Chuan-guo. He transformed Tibet into a pervasive police state by introducing something called the grid-style social management. What is this? This basically allows the local police to snoop on Tibetans easily. Chen introduced the formation of double-linked households. This is where family members were asked to watch over each other and report on each other. Now, China is cracking down on Tibetans the world over. According to a report, China secured a contentious extradition treaty with Nepal in the month of January this year. One of the proposals includes the extradition of newly arrived Tibetan refugees from Nepal. The agreement was widely opposed, but the Chinese managed to clinch the agreement in secret. China is also hiring spies to snoop on Tibetans abroad, and this report came out only today. An officer of the New York Police Department has been accused of spying on Tibetans for the Chinese government. Why is China doing all of this? The reasons are very clear. It is worried about the opposition within Tibet. It wants to crush any and all demands for freedom. China is executing a forced assimilation of Tibet into China. And the story, we can tell you, begins in 1950. That's when China claimed sovereignty over Tibet. In the last 70 years, Beijing has tried to maintain a strong grip over this region it occupied. And this is not just about territory. China wants to control Tibet for more reasons than one. This report tells you more.
Hu Jintao, the sixth president of China, has an interesting backstory. From 1988 to 1992, he was the Communist Party leader of Tibet. This was one of the most defining periods of his career, because as the party secretary in Tibet, Hu Jintao suppressed an uprising. In 1989, martial law was declared in Tibet. Tibetans rose to revolt against the Chinese occupation. China crushed the movement. Spain went to the extent of indicting Hu Jintao for the genocide in Tibet. But the very same actions also cleared his path to presidency. They also show how valuable Tibet is to China. The Chinese refer to Tibet as XINJIANG, a word that means the Western treasure house. And Tibet is indeed a treasure house. It sits on the western edge of China, links China to South and Central Asia, and has been a part of key trading routes since ancient times. It's no wonder then that many players have fought over Tibet. From the 7th century to the 21st, it has remained a contested region. The Mongols under Genghis Khan fought in 1240, the Nepalese in 1855, and the British in 1903. They wanted to control Tibet. But since 1950, China has been occupying Tibet and looting it of all its treasures, from something as basic as water to valuable natural resources. China is raiding Tibet for everything. Tibet is called Asia's water tower. The Qinghai Tibet Plateau is a crucial water source for China. Tibetan glaciers and snow-capped hills feed great rivers like the Brahmaputra, Mekong, Yangtze and the Indus. Tibet serves as a source of 10 major Asian river systems, rivers that flow into as many as 10 countries. And China has been building dams to control the flow of these waters. Tibet's rich reserves of oil, gas and minerals are like a pot of gold for China. In 2008, China operationalized the Yulong copper mine. Reports say this mine is the source of Tibet's biggest copper deposits. According to another claim, Tibet has huge reserves of copper, lithium, gold and silver. Most of it has been untouched because it is against the religious practices of Tibetans to mine these lands. But none of this stops China. Beijing earns a sizable chunk of its tourism revenues from Tibet. Last year, China reported that more than 40 million tourists visited the region. The tourism revenue was well over $7 billion. With every leadership change, Beijing has tightened its hold over Tibet. Hu Jintao imposed martial law. His successor Xi Jinping wants to build a fortress. In August, he met with representatives from the region. The Chinese president issued new policy directions for Tibet. He said political and ideological education must be strengthened in Tibet schools. A move to make Tibetans more loyal to the Communist Party by influencing young minds. The adults are being forced into labor training. China's militant control over Tibet includes indoctrination, mass jails and plunder. WION World is One.
From Tibet to space, China's range is pretty wide, we can tell you. It is trying to militarize the solar system and facing resistance and isolation globally now. We've often told you that future wars will be fought in space. Now we can tell you that that future is not far away. Almost every country in the world is trying to establish its hegemony in space, every country worth its salt. The methods may be different, but the motive is the same. Here's a report.
30th May, Kennedy Space Center, Florida. As the privately built SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket took off in triumph, US President Donald Trump made this declaration to the world.
The United States has regained our place of prestige as the world leader. As has often been stated, you can't be number one on Earth if you are number two in space.
4 months on, and the race for number one has more contenders. More countries are looking to establish their hegemony in space. But they are all united in achieving one goal: stopping the Chinese regime from colonizing the solar system. Beijing is increasingly being isolated in space exploration projects. Sweden's state-owned space agency has halted its operations with China. The Swedish Space Corporation was contracted to help Chinese satellites operate from its ground stations across the world. It has now decided to not renew the contract. China has been forbidden from accessing the ground stations of this space agency in Australia. This includes the Yathraga and Dongara satellite stations in Western Australia. The space agency fears that China could use its antennas at these stations for military purposes. Meanwhile, in West Asia, the US Space Force has begun its first mission. A squadron of 20 space operators have been stationed at the Al Udeid airbase in Qatar. Their mission? To track enemy maneuvers and avert conflicts in space.
Data building. Zooming in on grid. Whiskey Charlie 6. Check sources.
They have been given the power to jam, hack, and blind satellites that pose a heavy security risk.
Whiskey Charlie 6. How copy? Copy. ASAT launch.
The obvious targets will be Iran and China's satellite programs.
Spacecraft 6. Any attack against our space capabilities
execute
will be met with a deliberate response.
Back in America, NASA is planning to return to the moon. It has unveiled a new exploration project, the $27 billion Artemis program, the first such plan in 50 years. The space agency plans to put a man and a woman on its lunar lander by 2024. NASA's announcement comes on the heels of China's next lunar mission. The Chinese regime is quietly preparing for a November launch of the Chang'e 5 mission. Pentagon fears that China is trying to militarize the moon, that it could use its satellites to target America's space-based assets. India too is working to thwart any Chinese misadventures in space. ISRO is gearing up for a Chandrayaan-3 mission in early 2021. It is also readying its first manned space mission, Gaganyaan, expected to launch in 2 years.
The light from a star can take millions of years to reach Earth.
Space warfare is soon set to be a reality. Satellites and data set to be the new weapons.
I see exploration and courage. I see my country finding new horizons out there.
Bureau Report, WION.
And I see
World is
giant
one.
leaps making a comeback. I see myself.
Now to the biggest headline from Sri Lanka. A legislation that will make the president very powerful and above the law. We are talking about the 20th Amendment Bill. The government of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa tabled it in Parliament today. It makes his brother, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, legally immune. So no one in Sri Lanka will be allowed to question the president, not even the apex court. The 20th Amendment Bill allows Gotabaya Rajapaksa to do as he pleases. The bill restores the absolute power of the Lankan president. It needs two-thirds majority to be passed in Parliament. The Rajapaksas have the numbers on their side. This is the moment that the ruling party and these brothers, Gotabaya and Mahinda Rajapaksa, have been waiting for. But for many in Sri Lanka, the 20th Amendment Bill spells the end of democracy. It is a blast from the past, a period in history that many do not want to return to, especially the Tamils and the Muslims. Let me explain. Sri Lanka gained independence from the British rule in 1972. Since 1978, the country has always had an all-powerful president. The Lankan constitution was amended in 2015. The government of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe introduced the 19th Amendment. It put term limits, so a president could not continue in office for more than 2 terms. This new bill also curtailed the power of the president. It made the parliament stronger. That was in 2015. At that time, Maithripala Sirisena was the president of Sri Lanka. He supported the pro-democracy amendment. 5 years on, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is reversing these moves. The 20th Amendment gives the President complete control over the Parliament and the courts. The President will appoint the top judges. He will pick people for key positions. The Parliament will be reduced to a rubber stamp. But none of this should come as a surprise. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been eyeing this since he won the election in November last year, November 2019. This bill is the reason why he dissolved the parliament in March this year. He called for snap polls. His brother fought the election. He went to voters specifically asking for a two-thirds majority in parliament, and he got it last month. He won the parliamentary elections. Now he has the numbers, and Mahinda Rajapaksa is wasting no time in realizing his brother's political dreams. Critics call this constitutional dictatorship. In the past, this executive presidency has not really helped Sri Lanka's cause. It paved the way for conflict, for corruption and abuse of power. It also divided the Lankan society. The call to abolish the executive presidency was so strong that presidents starting 1994 won elections promising to abolish the system. Maithripala Sirisena was one of them. Minorities have been most vocal against centralization of power in Sri Lanka. The Easter attacks last year exposed Sri Lanka's fault lines. The country today is more divided than ever, both on ethnic and religious lines. The Rajapaksa brothers promised an executive presidency, and they're delivering it. They have the full support of the Sinhalese Buddhist majority. They want centralization of power. They also promise development and progress. Will this bill help them deliver on that promise? Or will it be a roadblock in Sri Lanka's growth? We'll wait and see. Let's turn to another neighbor, Nepal. Nepal's map fixing has triggered a series of comedy of errors for the Himalayan country. It put at risk the government of Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. It exposed China's influence in Kathmandu. It triggered a power tussle between Oli and former Prime Minister Prachand or Pushp Kamal Dahal. 4 months since the new map, we have another example of the widening divide between the two camps. This time it involves a certain textbook and a fight between Nepal's Education Ministry, the Land Management Ministry and the Ministry of Survey and the Ministry of External Affairs. There are 4 of them. Here's what's happening. The Ministry of Education released a textbook on the 15th of September. The book has 110 pages. It is supposed to be reference material on Nepal's territory and borders. It is meant for school students. Now, this book claims that Nepal's total land area is 1,47,641 square kilometers. It also says that the Indian areas of Kalapani belong to Nepal. The book also has a very interesting preface. It is 6 pages long, but that's not the interesting bit. Guess who's written it? Nepal's Education Minister Giriraj Mani Pokharel. The minister writes that he has campaigned for 24 years to quote-unquote chase the Indian army from the Nepali territories of Kalapani, Lipu Lake and Limpiadura. Just to put the facts out, Kalapani, Lipu Lake and Limpiadura are Indian territories. Nepal claims that these belong to Nepal, or rather it is being forced to claim this by its friends in Beijing. Anyway, this controversial book has irked the Nepali cabinet. So the cabinet has asked the Education Ministry to halt the distribution of the book and stop its printing. Why? Because the Ministry of Land Management says the Education Ministry does not have the quote-unquote expertise on the subject. The Kathmandu Post quotes a spokesperson as saying, the Education Ministry stepped on the jurisdiction of the Land Management and Foreign Affairs Ministry. And that's not all. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs apparently had no clue about this book. So is this a case of a communication gap, or is there more to it? There certainly is. There's politics. Our sources tell us that this is the Prachand camp at work. They're trying to win brownie points on nationalism. The education of Minister of Nepal is Prachand's man. And he wants this book out. The Oli camp, on the other hand, seems to be trying to course correct or just stop Team Prachand from scoring a point. The Land Management Ministry, which is led by the Oli camp, is relying on 5 points to justify the book ban. First, it says the book has a number of factual errors. We agree. Second, it says that it's not the job of the Education Ministry to decide on issues like area and border. Third, the preface is outrageous and inappropriate. Again, we agree. Fourth, the Land Management Ministry says certain content should not have been published at all. And fifth, it objects to the timing of the publication. And speaking of timing, it was only 2 days ago that India handed over 2 modern trains to Nepal that will run between Jayanagar in Bihar and Kurtha in Nepal, and are also expected to bridge the widening gap between the two neighbors. How do you think China is reacting to all of this? Write to us. For the moment, we'll turn to Iraq. When in crisis, our natural instinct is to turn to our loved ones. The world has not seen a bigger crisis than the Wuhan virus pandemic in many, many decades. And in the last few months, this crisis has brought many of us closer to our families, our friends, our colleagues. In Iraq, the pandemic has brought the people, the citizens, closer to their faith. Here's a report.
Thousands of people visit Imam Hussein's resting place here. This glittering city of Karbala is eclipsed, whose history has showered its people with grief. If in the 1980s it was the war with Iran, in the 1990s the country was crippled by US sanctions. America invaded them in 2003. Soon, dictator Saddam Hussein was hunted and killed. When his statue fell to the ground in April 2003, a sense of hope rose in the hearts of the Iraqis. They dreamt of a new beginning, a happy beginning. But history had other plans for Iraq. The country was soon engulfed in sectarian infighting. The Islamic State added to their sorrow. The country lost it all: its infrastructure, healthcare, education. The only thing that remained was their faith. Every year when Iraqis flocked to Karbala, they carried with them a heart full of worries and grief.
Who lost someone close to them, their father or their mother, when they remember the ordeal of Imam Hussein and its greatness and enormity, they also commemorate their family members, the martyrs, and their own departed, their mothers, fathers.
Despite the ban on large gatherings, tens of thousands are attending the Ashura rituals. With masks, disinfectants and temperature checks, Iraq is once again leaning on religion. Iraq is turning to faith for consolation.
Now for our daily segment on the US election, 42 days to go. Early voting is currently underway in 5 states: Virginia, South Dakota, Wyoming, New Jersey and Vermont. In the next 6 weeks, at least 18 more states will begin early voting. Both Biden and Trump have rallies planned in all of these states. And last we checked, Donald Trump was campaigning in Ohio. Joe Biden had taken a flight to Wisconsin. Let's start with the US President. He held 2 election rallies in Ohio. The arenas were filled to the brim at both the venues. Thousands of Trump supporters stood in line to hear their president. What did he have to say? Well, he could not control his excitement for the presidential debates, something which he only has been doing for 3.5 years, but Joe Biden for 47. So Trump says that it should be an easy task for Biden to beat him. These are his words. Listen to this.
We have a debate coming up, and who knows? You know, look, he's been doing this. You know what? He's been doing it for 47 years. I've been doing it for 3.5 years, so he should be able to beat me, I would think. He's much more experienced. He's great. Oh, he's a beauty. But he betrayed you. He lied to you. He abused you, which is why it's time to retire Joe Biden. This is serious stuff.
It's time to retire, says Donald Trump. Joe Biden does not seem to agree. He took the fight to the U.S. president's own backyard, Wisconsin, a state that chose Trump in 2016. Biden slammed Trump's decision to hold campaign rallies without social distancing and masks. And then he had a question. Why does Trump make his supporters risk their lives but keeps a safe distance from them?
Oh, he loves his rallies. The next time he holds one, look closely. Trump keeps his distance from anyone in the rally. The folks who come are packed in tight as they can be, risking disease, mostly without masks, but not Trump. He safely keeps his distance. As a reporter, they showed a couple days ago, a reporter trying to come up, or someone come to talk, he said, no, you got to keep your distance. I don't get close to these people. He's willing to let everybody else in the crowd risk their lives, but not him.
He's letting everybody risk their lives. What do the American voters think? Do they agree with Joe Biden? Let's listen to some voices.
Sometimes chemotherapy is necessary for cancer. Trump is chemotherapy. These people are socialist, communist, pieces of no good excrement. We will accept whatever Trump is. Better a jerk than a communist.
Wouldn't be my ideal candidate, probably. It's just that he's not Donald Trump. I don't know how candid I'm allowed to be here, but I think that Donald Trump is not a good person as far as social and other concerns. I think he's done a few good things, but the bad things that he's done and said, not even as president, but just as a human being, greatly turned me off from the beginning. And I think that any candidate is better than him. And I think that Biden is the only one that could get a majority of the votes to get Donald Trump out of office.
Honestly, it's been a mixture. It's been a mixture here. So over here where the city part of Scranton is, everybody's for Biden. But once you go out maybe 10-15 minutes towards the farms, a lot of Trump supporters over there. So I think it's kind of a mixture over here. But it is Joe Biden.
42 days to go and America still remains deeply divided. Meanwhile, the US president also addressed the UN General Assembly session earlier this evening. This was a virtual address. Trump spent most of the time talking about the Wuhan virus, but what stood out was a series of attacks on China. The US president blamed China for unleashing the pandemic upon the world, and he asked the United Nations to hold China accountable.
We will defeat the virus. We will end the pandemic. And we will enter a new era of unprecedented prosperity, cooperation, and peace. As we pursue this bright future, we must hold accountable the nation which unleashed this plague onto the world, China. In the earliest days of the virus, China locked down travel domestically while allowing flights to leave China and infect the world. China condemned my travel ban on their country, even as they canceled domestic flights and locked citizens in their homes. The Chinese government and the World Health Organization, which is virtually controlled by China, falsely declared that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. Later, they falsely said people without symptoms would not spread the disease. The United Nations must hold China accountable for their actions.
Shortly after Trump's address, it was time for the Chinese president to speak. Xi Jinping said differences between nations are natural, but they should be settled through dialogue. Imagine that coming from him. He called China a peace-loving country that seeks neither a hot nor a cold war.
Facing the virus, we should put people and life first. We should mobilize all resources to make a science-based and targeted response. No patient should be missed and no patient should be left untreated. The spread of the virus must be contained. Facing the virus, we should enhance solidarity and get through this together. You should follow the guidance of science, give full play to the leading role of the World Health Organization, and launch a joint international response to beat this pandemic. Any attempt to politicize the issue or stigmatization must be rejected.
Meanwhile, the India-China border standoff continues while the Chinese president spoke about using dialogue to resolve differences. India and China have released a joint statement after the 6th round of a commander-level meeting. The two sides have agreed that no further build-up will take place along the border. This is a joint press release. They agreed to, quote-unquote, earnestly implement the important consensus reached by the leaders of the two countries. They've promised to avoid misunderstandings and misjudgments, to stop sending more troops to the front line, refrain from taking any actions that may further complicate the situation. But is China going back? No, it isn't. The two sides have also agreed to hold the 7th round of commander-level meetings as soon as possible. Basically, they've agreed to continue to talk. Finally, some food for thought. In an increasingly divided world, humans can learn from whales. Whales are a great example of loving your lot, of sticking together. If one whale gets lost, they risk an entire pod, an entire group to save it. That also explains the latest mass whale stranding off the coast of Australia. Rescuers are scrambling to save 270 pilot whales. 90 of them are already feared dead. Here's a report.
The shallow waters of Tasmania's coast are running thick with hundreds of pilot whales. These slick black mammals are helpless and maneuvering for space. The pod has nearly 270 of the long-finned pilot whales. 90 of them are feared dead. The marooning is Tasmania's worst in over a decade, but it's not a first. Something like this happened in March 2009. 194 whales and a small dolphin pod were stranded. Most did not survive. Australia and New Zealand are two hotspots of marine mammal strandings. Since 1840, over 5,000 strandings of whales and dolphins have been recorded. Why do whales get stranded in such big numbers? Because they stick together. Whales have very tight family bonds. If one whale is stranded, others hear its calls and follow. The result is this: the entire pod is beached. Put more simply, one whale's problem is the entire family's problem. Pilot whales who use echolocation to migrate, shallow waters can leave them confused. One navigational error can lead to a mass stranding. Whale numbers are dwindling. The figures look grim. The world is left with only 400 North Atlantic right whales, barely 9,000 sei whales, 25,000 South Atlantic humpback whales, 31,000 of short-finned pilot whales, and 200,000 of long pilot-finned whales. And that's why Tasmania's rescue operation is crucial. Usually, specialized equipment is brought in to return stranded whales from beaches to the ocean. But in the Tasmanian case, the challenge is far more complex. Rescuers are having to reach the sandbars by boat. Diving into the chilly waters, they are guiding the whale out of the harbour and finally into the open ocean. The method has saved at least 25 whales so far. The rescue operation is a race against time. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.